Hello, everything is all screwy. That's fun. I'm Chris Solo, and welcome to the Fable 42, where we build community through friendship, gaming, and, like always, chaos. Everything's always chaos. I love all things chaos. I'll fix this layout in a second, but we are here at Fable 42. You can find us at twitch.tv/Fable42. But before we get into today's panel, I'm going to do some really quick announcements. Everything that you see that's 3D printed in all of our streams is brought to you by Griffin Co. And our video and audio displays, player indicators, digital dice, zoom features on the battle map are all brought to you by Vorpal Board. You all know who I am, but let's introduce the rest of our panelists. Em, would you like to start over?
Thank you, Chris. Hi, my name is Em. I use she, her pronouns. I am, by day, a therapist who works with young people and likes to try and bring RPGs into therapy as much as possible. And then when I'm not doing that, I am a cast member over at Blackwater D&D. We stream our main campaign, which is Homebrewed, every Saturday night at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You'll see me over there playing Tiefling Grave Cleric Nepentha, so please come and hang out with us. We also do a show on Monday nights, which is like our lore and chat show, and then on Wednesdays we have a weekly kind of variety show where we do talk about DMing, we do an advice show, and then we also do a monthly one-shot. So come hang out, come give us a follow on all of the socials at Blackwater D&D and at twitch.tv/Blackwater D&D. And that's me.
I'm very excited to join your game.
Yes, we'll drop it here. Chris is going to come guest in a couple weeks, which is very, very exciting. We're really stoked to have him on the show.
Me too. Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. I am the Director of Education and Training at Game to Grow. Game to Grow is a 501c3 nonprofit that believes in the use of games of all kind for community, educational, and personal growth. I run a bunch of therapeutic social skills groups using Dungeons and Dragons. That is also what our training program is about. So I have a really cool job where I get to play D&D and teach people how to use D&D therapeutically. I'm also a licensed psychologist in the state of Washington, so I provide individual therapy as well.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that you are here.
Thanks.
And last but not least, Austin.
Hi, my name is Austin. My pronouns are she and they. I am not a mental health professional. I do have mental health issues that I speak with a mental health professional twice a week about. But I actually, I'm from a theater background. So I have an acting and directing degree. A lot of my work has been focused on the way we move in media and the way our real lives affect media and vice versa. Right now, I'm working on a YouTube channel called Queer Venture Time, where I'm actually talking a lot about topics like this, where I'm coming from more of a player perspective. Definitely, I'm not, like I said, not a mental health professional, so I am so stoked to be on a panel with these two. However that worked. And yeah, I'm super excited to bring the theater perspective.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining me today on this panel. Very important panel. We've done a couple other ones in the past, and we did one with the Game to Grow folks. What was it? Was it Gen Con? Is that what it was?
I think it was Gen Con. There's been a lot of online
too many. I'm tired. We talked about this already. But so, there's a lot of a lot of things in regards to the mental health that come from tabletop, and there's a lot of things that tabletop can help with mental health and vice versa. So my first question is what is the most impactful moment that any of you have experienced as a player, a DM, or watching a tabletop stream specifically, or playing tabletop in this current age that has impacted you, that has made you want to continue to do what you're doing, or to do more?
Oh man, you said you were gonna start with a hard question.
And then you brought that.
Yeah.
I guess I can trust you now. Like, does that what that means? You want one?
man.
You want one moment.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm like, I have the, the really vague, like, every time we all have a great time.
Oh,
Like,
no, here,
that's the first answer,
got an
right?
Well, I could start with one to warm it up, and then you all can jump in if that
Go
helps,
for
if that
it.
helps.
How about it?
Yeah.
We've talked about this in several panels now, that I realized about a year into me DMing games that I was putting my players through my demons. Things that I couldn't handle myself, whether it was, childhood PTSD or my several military terms PTSD, but I was putting them through. Like it was really surreal when I realized that when I was putting people through this, and so, like, oh my god, like, I can't do this by myself, I need my friends to help me, and that's what it turned out to be. And there's lots of moments of that, and that was all, like, really therapeutic for myself. So I kept, selfishly wanting to keep playing D&D for myself. About 3 months ago, one of our fans had sent me a message and said, "Hey, Chris Solo, I'm so thankful for your community that you've built and the games that you play on Twitch, because it's helped me get through COVID." That was my impactful moment to keep doing what we're doing, because we have built a very awesome, inclusive community that I knew was awesome and inclusive. People have been saying that forever, but not to that extent. Like that, someone telling me that, this community, this network has, like, saved their health, saved their mental health, saved their life, helped them get through really hard times. And, wow. Like, that in itself has made me, like, I think about it every day now. Literally think about it every day. And when I meet this person, they're going to get bruised by the hugs I'm giving them. Like, that's probably not okay. But no, like, I will give them really good hugs.
We understand the sentiment.
Really good Papa Bear hugs. But that's my moment, right? Like, there was a lot of selfish reasons why I wanted to do it, because it was extremely therapeutic for myself. But that was a big moment. That was a really big moment for me.
Do you have one?
I've got the problem is, like, picking and then making them a normal person.
Yeah, I'm like, you probably have a much more difficult time with this because you literally do that as a job, like, of helping people find breakthroughs through tabletop. So I'm sure you've got a list.
Yeah. So, I think that I can tell you, I'm going to steal actually my husband's story because he does the same work. It was from his very, very first group of how he realized, like, this works. And then if we want more stories, I'll tell you more stories later. But this is the heartwarming one that nothing dies in the middle. So he, the first time he ran this group, it was at the VA, so it was with a bunch of veterans, and it was inpatient PTSD treatment, so residential. Sorry, not inpatient. So you're there for 4 or 6 weeks, doing a lot of treatment all day long, which is hard and challenging and exhausting and often not fun. And so he got permission to run a therapeutic tabletop group. And the first week he set up with your, like, classic tavern scene introduction. And so everybody's placing their mini. This is back when you could, like, be in person with other people.
The before times. Yes.
The before times. Everybody, like, is literally placing their mini on the board. And the last guy places his mini and he leans back and he goes, "Oh, are we allowed to curse on this stream?"
Yes.
Okay,
I am the biggest offender.
And he looks up and he's like, "Guys, did anybody else notice that all of us are in this tavern and we all placed our characters, are not real characters, all with our backs to the wall?
Yeah.
And all we're doing is, like, hyper vigilant. We're just watching. Nothing's going on. Nothing bad has happened. But all we're doing is we're, like, sitting in the corner and just waiting for something to happen." Mm-hmm. And that's when Jared was like, "Oh, thank God this is going to work." But I one of the things I love about the intentional use of RPGs and therapeutic applied RPGs specifically is you get to create so much more perspective, and you get to create so much more perspective in a place where you can actually learn from it.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, if I'm actually in an environment where I am really, really hypervigilant, the part of my brain that allows me to be hypervigilant is like not connected to the part of my brain that is connected to learning and memory consolidation.
Yeah.
And so we need to have space from that amount of distress and arousal to be able to learn stuff. And so D&D can be a great way where we get to have experience. I'm not saying you're never stressed in D&D or it's never scary, but we can vary the amount of psychological intensity, which means that we're able to actually learn from our experiences and take those out in the real world.
I think I've got one, and it's a bit different of a context. I have run games therapeutically before in my own work, and I think it somehow seems I work with young people primarily. So like we're talking like 12 to 26 is kind of the age range that I work with. Yeah, no, like adolescents, teens, emerging adults, and then like brand new adults. I'm kind of out there in the world and getting on their feet. And I sometimes seem to stumble across the clients who also play D&D. They find their way to start working with me, and it's wonderful. And one of my clients had been chatting D&D, and how much freedom she had felt by being able to be in this game where her life was so out of control that she didn't get to do any of that kind of stuff, and found herself quite paralyzed in life making decisions. And we kind of started down this line of conversation, and she was playing this like forest gnome rogue who always had a quick answer for everything and was bright on her, like quick on her feet, and ingenuitive. And I looked at her one day and I said, "What would Hilda do?" And she was like, "What?" And I was like, "Let's pretend you're not you for a moment. Let's pretend that you're Hilda. And what would she do if she was in your shoes right now?" So I think for me, that's always been something that's stuck through, because there's, reams and reams of moments that I've had at the table myself, or, with other players that have been therapeutic, but like sitting in the therapy chair and having my client be able to step into her character for a moment to help problem solve in her real life in a situation that was so beyond her level of like what she could cope with at that time was really cool. And I think speaks a lot to me about what this game does for people and why it is such a fantastic vehicle for therapeutic experiences as well as therapy, like capital T therapy as a whole. And yeah, it's D&D and therapy, that kind of meeting of where RPGs and the therapy world just kind of line up is like the most profound thing for me. And it's something I continually always want to bring into my practice and work so well with young people. So well. So I think that's my big moment.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So my experience is super different. I mean, I am kind of coming from more of the perspective of the person who contacted solo. Like D&D has 100% kept me alive through quarantine. I'm a naturally very social person. Before quarantine, I hosted a drag show every week at a bar, and I love talking to people, hanging out with people, and D&D has provided all of that for me in this situation. I'm playing 5 games right now, y'all.
Wow.
Yeah, 5 games because I'm unemployed and there's nothing going on. There's no prospect of it. So specifically, a specific experience was just there was one day where the news was just hitting a whole lot harder than usual. And it was just completely slowing me down. Everything was taking 30 minutes longer than it should have done. I had errands that I had to run and didn't get a chance to run before the game. And it was literally just having the ability of being able to contact my DM, who is a hardcore DM who's been DMing for a long time, really serious about their games. Like, if you miss a session, you do not get the experience points for that session. And just letting him know, being like, hey, this is what's going on with me today, and I'm so sorry I'm going to be a little bit late, and him completely understanding and just being totally happy and like telling me to take what I need, and then just in general providing that space for me then to not just not, period.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it's fascinating too, being a DM and being a player on so many other games that we stream, and hearing all the different perspectives and things that people are dealing with on a normal basis, just even pre-COVID. I used to kind of, I mean, I've always been milestone, but I used to kind of be a stickler, like, no, you have to be there every show, and then realizing that I need to be a human being and not a robot, which I do have to be reminded all the time, because I do have Asperger's, and I am a robot all the time. All the time, I will be a robot. And it's an interesting thing when you start to feel like a human and start to react like a human, and like we're all using this game for the same reasons. Like, and there are people who like to play the game for the numbers, and they're just like, I like the math, and they go crazy for it. And it's probably not therapeutic for them. Like, they're here to well, it might even be therapeutic for them, actually, now that I'm saying it out loud. But there's different types of games, so. And, that's the biggest thing that I've told everyone who is asking for advice about DMing or about playing is, like, if that situation went differently and you brought that up to your DM and they were kind of a jerk about it, that's not your DM. And then you walk away and you find a DM that would respect your space and because the bottom line is like, if you're not in the right headspace, if you're having a bad day or you're feeling super sad or what have you, and you come to the game, you're not going to have fun, and you're not going to bring what you normally bring, which it just affects the whole chemistry of it. So it's better for everyone if you're just not feeling it, to whatever. And I learned this lesson kind of hard. It ended up being okay on our end, and we talked about it. But those of you, I'm not going to go into it, but those of you who have watched other panels, when I murdered GW's NPC sister in the game, that morning, and one of my players was like, I'm having a really hard day. Can we please not have an emotional moment today? And I was like, oh my God. Like, I should have said, Anne, but see, like, selfishly as a DM, I kind of wanted her to be there because she wanted to experience this, but I should have done something different, right? But, like, there was so many different things at play. There was a guest player coming in, and he was the one who turned to become the antagonist. And, like, I played Russian roulette selfishly and should have checked in more and be like, well, actually, this episode was meaning to be very emotional. I understand if you don't want to be there for that, and I respect that. That's what I should have done. And then let her make that choice instead of being forced into a very emotional, where everyone's crying and angry kind of moment. But we learn, right? We're human.
I want to say, I was watching the role play panel that y'all did, and Em, you were on that, correct?
I was, yeah.
I think started talking a lot about consent.
Yes.
Really, I really do feel like it all boils down to that consent, and we need to almost strengthen the security nets that we have underneath us while we're playing in tabletop role playing. Because coming from a theater background, tabletop role-playing really is a mix of theater and improv. You're trying to get the long-form narrative that you get out of theater with the spontaneity of improv. However, when you're trying when you're combining those two, you're missing the safety nets of theater, which gives you hours and hours and hours of rehearsal.
Yeah.
By the time I perform something in front of an audience, I've experienced it hundreds of times. Yeah. And improv, where it's 5 minutes, the sketch is 5 minutes long. Yeah. If something gets awkward or uncomfortable.
But also, if we think about like the best improv groups, they're obviously like very skilled and they're very creative, but they also trust each other, right? Yes. Like, the best improv groups have also had conversations about, like, dude, we're not touching these topics, right? Like
Yeah.
there's still that informed consent, right? Because there are so many ways, like you mentioned earlier, Chris, in terms of like, you really want to just you want to have a math game? Cool, you can have a math game. But like, if I don't want to have a math game, we probably shouldn't be at the same table. We need to know that that's what's happening. There's nothing wrong in having graphic violence in your games, or like adult content or explicit scenes or themes that might be really upsetting to other people. That's fine. But everybody needs to know that that's what's happening, and they need to be able to opt in. They need to be able to say, yes, I am on board with that. And
like
they need
sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, like an emphatic, ongoing dynamic, yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So we talk about session 0 a lot, which is this idea of like, before you start playing, we have this list of like, this is my no list. This is my things that I don't want. This is my please list. This is my thing that's like, please have these in the game. But I think session 0, as convenient it is like a short phrase where everybody kind of knows that that's when we talk about consent, and that's when we talk about what this game is going to look like and whether or not we're going to do milestone or experience points or whatever.
Unearthed Arcana.
Yeah, but I think, can you use Rick and Morty content? Like random stuff like that. I think that it's kind of a misnomer, because session 0 shouldn't just happen at session 0. It should be an open conversation, especially with the world the way it is, right? Maybe I was totally fine with plagues last year, but now I don't want them in my game.
You have to allow your players to amend their yes or no.
Absolutely.
Especially with players who maybe don't know what this game is, with newer players, they might not realize what content they're okay and not okay with, in part because they have no idea what's going to come up in these games, or they don't realize the potential emotional impact these games can have.
Absolutely. And I think something that I've tried to incorporate in every game that I've played in as a player or run or in any kind of along those lines, or working with other folks to be like, this is kind of the when we're considering how mental health intersects with tabletop role playing games, talking about like the concept of like check in with your table on an ongoing basis. I think of like our stream over at Blackwater. Before our session every week, I lead the group in a 5-minute grounding exercise. So we're all here, we're present, we're available. And I think the concept of ritual, everyone kind of, not only just showing up, whether that's, clicking the Zoom link or, tuning in or, joining in the room that you're playing in, if safe to do so, that concept of ritual can be so grounding and so connecting to folks. Because that's what we're building, right? We're building safe space for emotional play and engagement in a fantasy setting to explore humanity in a fantasy setting. And then go ahead.
And like, know where the bounds are. Then they
exactly.
They can get really excited and they can get really creative, because there's this safe structure, right? Like you've got a solid ground to stand on, because I know what's going to happen and what's not going to happen. I know how this is going to work, and then you get to explore.
Yeah, I mean,
totally.
That's the main reason why, like, I make my door very open. Like, if something that we did that everyone has agreed to touches on something you're not feeling comfortable with, those players have the comfort and safety to come up and say, hey, Solo, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, and then go back. Or I go back and watch the footage. But even a bigger safety net, because I am the big bad Solo, right? I am the owner of the network, so people may not want to come to me. Every single one of my shows has a producer attached to the show that is not a player or DM as that third-party mediator to solve conflict or be there for a mediator because of some emotional thing. If the DM kind of comes off a little too heavy-handed or what have you, and you don't feel comfortable telling them, you can tell your show producer, and then they can talk to the producer or talk to the DM about just listening to what you have to say and honoring and respecting that. And all my DMs do that here, or they wouldn't be here if they didn't. And so that's just kind of. But you can do that at home. Like, I talk a lot about show stuff, but you can do it at home. You can record your sessions and go back and watch. and you could see.
Asking your players for feedback.
Yes.
Also,
Yes.
like it could be something as simple as something, that I've always tried to incorporate in is a temperature check. Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. Like, how are you feeling? If you're anywhere below, kind of like here, what can we do as a group to help amend that? Like, is that something like leaving space to talking about that? If something has touched on a specific issue that's brought up something for you, whether through your character or through yourself as the player, like, this is a safe space to talk about it because we care about each other, because the emotional bonds that you form with the players and the DM are something so special and magical, and they kind of transcend the bonds of what kind of real world friendships exist like. And especially when, I think for me as someone who plays like with my 5 of my best friends and my husband, that it's just like our relationships take on a different aspect because I also care about them as a person and I care about their characters. Like their characters mean something to me. So there's this duality, this dual relationship that I have with them, makes the care for them so much deeper, and can provide such a nice safety unit. I've met a lot of folks who are like, I don't have any, friends in more traditional settings that I've met in more traditional places, but my D&D group, those people would do anything for me, and I'd do anything for them.
You touched on something that I really want to illuminate, which is the trust that you build at the table, and especially though the trust between players and their DM. It really kind of is the DM's job to keep everybody safe in that situation. I mean, and DMs already do it without realizing it. Like, they could throw a dragon at a level 1 party at any time, but they don't, because they want people to enjoy themselves and they don't want to give them obstacles that they can't face. But I've found that drawing that parallel between, building combat encounters and building the political setting of your game is not necessarily always drawn. I've got major authority issues because I've been burned by authority a lot for a lot of reasons that are out of my control, right? So I really need to have a really strong bond of trust with my dungeon master. And I need to really feel safe in their hands in order for me to be able to give myself over into this story that I really do want to play and put myself in. But because of real life, I have so many walls that I have to get through and be told that I'm allowed to take down before I'm allowed to give myself into that character.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's. We could talk about this for hours, I think.
No, literally, I'm like, we're only having 1 hour-long panel on this?
We'll do another. We'll have to do another.
We'll definitely have a part 2.
Straight up.
We do have some really good questions, though, so I want to get to some of those real quick.
Wow.
Do you think it's more productive to play a character with similar issues, or someone without to see the other side? That's it's an interesting question, because like I play with a lot of people from Wounded Warrior Project, so I play with a lot of vets. Not necessarily from like the the therapeutic side of things. This is more of just trying to build that community again. Like, get a lot of vets together, play an awesome game, and then have fun. And it's an interesting thing, because especially people who have never played D&D before, I usually tell them to play a character just like you. Yeah. Because it's easier to role play, it's easier to settle in. And then you'll find out a lot about yourself that you didn't know before. However, for someone who's then a little bit more advanced, this is not necessarily from like the mental standpoint, but maybe it is, and I don't even know it. Is like, I usually play a charismatic character. I usually play a character who wants to lead, but also cares about his party. Right? That's usually my go-to. I have a character that I would have played in a campaign that might be after this show, but I took a step back to let someone else play, right? So then I put this character that I've been wanting to play for a really long time back on the shelf. And Diane's in the chat. She's probably laughing right now, because she's the DM for the next show. But this character is legitimately the exact opposite of me. He's very timid. He's very shy. He's very bashful. But that's actually who I am, which is the funny thing. So I've been doing this for 3 years, and everybody's like, "Oh, solo, solo, solo." Every single show, I'm freaking out. I am not a social person, not at all. Like I am when I talk about D&D and things that I'm passionate about, but that's it. You ask me like about politics, and my brain goes, whatever, right? But I'm very shy. I'm very, reserved, and I'm very protective still, but I'm very so that's actually a character that I've wanted to play. So like I've been playing characters that are me on the outside, but I've been wanting to play this one character that is me on the inside, which is a completely different perspective. But I'd love to hear your all's thoughts too.
Well, going back to the original question, and I think you really explained it really well, is we all contain multitudes. We I'm every woman. Like we are everything. All of that is inside of us. We can all be proud and anxious, afraid, all of these things at times. So, I almost don't accept the premise of the question, but that sounds way too pretentious. But really, because you're just you're exploring another facet of your personality that maybe does not get a chance to shine as often. Yeah. But we all can be loud. We all can be quiet,
I think there's so much space to kind of have that conversation with yourself when you're, conceptualizing who this person is that you're going to bring to the table. Something that, has always been kind of a driving force for me while I've been playing, and, kind of, I said this a little bit in the role play panel last week. I have had the honor of being someone who's been able to kind of shepherd a lot of people into D&D and being like, please come play. It's the best. Everyone should like D&D. Well, not should like, but can like D&D. But there's so many facets of that you can explore with yourself. What is safe for you to touch on? Like maybe there's parts of yourself that you haven't, done your deep dive, done your exploring with. And maybe there's bits that you've I've shut this in a box, I have taped it, I have locked it up, I have shoved it away, and we're not going to talk about that stuff. Maybe that's not stuff that you bring to the table. But, but through the concept, as these characters go through this campaign, they go through whatever arc, and they start forming bonds with the other players, you as the players and the characters, you start uncovering things about your character that you didn't know existed. Because they start that kind of interweaving of you and them becomes this beautiful exploration. And then you start kind of taking exams of who am I? And how am I growing? And who is this character and how are they growing? And those two are often quite parallel. They're very rarely perpendicular. Yeah. You're going through an aspect of growth as a person, whereas your character might be static. Characters are not necessarily boring, but they don't often reflect that kind of real humanity that we experience. And the person that you start off with as level 1 is going to be the character you end with at whatever level you end at. That's going to be a very different person because of the things they experience, and change is constant. It is inevitable. So allowing yourself to grow and your character to grow too, as long as it's safe to do so. Touch on stuff that's safe, and maybe leave the other stuff for a little bit later if you feel more comfy.
Yeah, and it's obviously going to depend on the kind of game you're playing, right? If you're a social game, you're not going to turn your friends into your therapist. That is going to end really poorly for everybody involved.
Please don't.
If you want to engage in therapeutic games, Game to Grow offers them worldwide now. So please reach out. But one of the things I love about D&D is the ability to get to explore pieces of yourself that maybe you want to come back to. But it's really hard to do in the real world, right? Because everybody expects you to be a certain way. Your parents expect you to be a certain way. Your bosses expect you to be a certain way. Your friends, your partners, your coworkers, right? You have all these expectations. And so if you're maybe I want to be more assertive, or maybe I want to be less impulsive, or maybe I want to be a different way, it can be really challenging to try that out and see how it works, IRL, because you will often get pushback. It's not necessarily mean pushback, but they're like, that's not how you've acted for the last 5 to 30 years. What's happening? And especially if you're not quite sure if you really want to push that new part of your identity, then it might feel really unsafe to try it. But D&D is a space where you intentionally get to play someone else if you want to. So you don't even have to tell anybody that this is something that you're trying out, that this is something that you want to see if it happens. And you get the safe place to kind of sandbox it and see if that's a part of you want to hold on to.
Straight up, as somebody who got comfortable with being trans and presenting as femme by playing female characters while getting my theater degree. All of that, everything you just said, all of it.
This is not this obviously came from places, right? Like I didn't just come up with this myself, in part because I learned so much from my clients. I've had a couple of clients where they've said, where they have intentionally created characters to try out new identities. And sometimes those identities are related to things like being more assertive or being quieter. But I recently had a client that in this particular game, the players helped this god save a pocket world and then discovered that the god was a really bad caretaker of this pocket world. So they were like, we're going to take over and take care of the world instead. And I gave them all infinite power, which was a questionable thing for me to do as a DM. But it's fine. You should totally
great test of character.
You totally give infinite power to a bunch of preteens. It's a great idea.
Absolutely.
And one
great
of
power
my
comes great responsibility. There, I said it.
Screwing up the mechanics of my game. One of my players was like, I think that my character would stay here. I think that my character would stay here, and she would like help and take over this world. And am I allowed to retire my character? Because I think this is what she would do. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And then this player came back the next week with a new character. And when introducing this character, my player said, oh, my character uses they, them pronouns. And I was like, cool. And then my player said, and I also use they, them. And the whole group was like, all right, cool. But it was this awesome place. And it was really, really clear that like this player had obviously had enough experience with this group to realize that this was a safe space. But also got the opportunity to introduce this new character and get to see how everybody responded, and then use it as an opportunity to say, and this is who I am. And this is how this is reflected. And that is such a powerful thing to get to get to have, to get to try out. And so I think it can be an amazing place to get to kind of explore identities. Especially because we live in a world that say like, you're born into this box, exist in this box. I didn't come out until I was 28 and married for 2.5 years. And I'm still happily married, but because we come out in this box and there's this expectation that this is what you should look like and this is how you should act and this is how you should be, and even the idea of like maybe that doesn't quite fit can be really hard and really, really challenging. And D&D can provide a really safe space to explore that.
Because how wonderful is it to be able to kind of sit down when you're creating this character and be able to not come with any preconceptions and not have the world tell you that, you know, except for probably some minor things in the world about like how some of the mechanics work. But you get to decide in this universe exactly who you are and how you present to your group and like how you exist in this world. And the players that you sit down with are going to say, yep. And they're going to love you for it. They're going to love you for every aspect of it, and they're going to take care of each other.
I do want to touch on that, though. It is going to take active work to maintain that.
Yes.
I like straight up this Fabled 42, and I found Fabled 42 because you guys did a game with one of the dungeon dudes, and I've been following them. Those are the first 2 non-queer specific networks that I've joined. because those are the safe spaces, you know, and that is the thing where we as people create the safe spaces that we see fit, and that fit, the definition of fit, is going to change based on who is in the space. And understanding that reality can sometimes take a lot of work, which and that reality also, at least in my case, and I know a lot of people's cases, is heavily based in the political reality that we live in.
Yeah.
Which is why I really, you know, do try to have explicit conversations about that, because D&D you're setting up a political world. Politics is power dynamics. The whole thing is power dynamics. We call DMs God. That's a power dynamic.
Well, let's just be clear. Gods are just NPCs. Let's just be clear.
But you know, it's like it's all stuff that we do really need to. It takes active work to have those open conversations and be open to those spaces and people who have those issues.
Absolutely, Austin. And I think you also bring up a really good point. It takes intentional work to create these safe spaces. If you are in a space that you want to be safe, you should be talking to the people in your community and making sure that's happening. And if there are people that aren't in your community that you'd really like to be in your community, maybe asking them for kind of feedback around why that's not happening. And asking for feedback isn't actually enough. You also have to show that you're a safe person to give feedback to, right? So you have to actively show that you are willing to take that criticism, right? If someone says, oh, I don't feel safe in your community, not because you've done anything, but because I don't see anybody else who looks like me or talks like me in your community. Turning back and saying, well, we're safe and we would totally accept you, that's not going to fix the problem, right? But saying like, oh, that totally makes sense. I'd love to highlight more people with your background or your history or your identity. Would you be interested in being one of those people, right? Talking about like what it would take to make that community safe, because especially for any kind of marginalized group, so much energy is spent just trying to not deal with discrimination and hate.
Yes.
The last thing you want to do when you're in your free time is give a bunch of communities a chance,
only to get burned.
A lot of work.
And that like stacking on of emotional labor too, because I think a lot of times what happens with marginalized folks is when they'll encounter a community, and a community will say, well, then tell us how we can make it safe. And it's like, gosh, that is so much emotional labor. That it's so much work that this person from this marginalized aspect of their identity, or those intersections in their identity, it's like this person is doing so much work already. It's like we, as everyone has the ability to educate themselves, and that can be brought into the D&D setting, and being aware of like sociocultural and political milieus and what that means for people's aspect of identity, and like neurodiversity, folks of color, indigenous issues, all of the isms and how they intersect together. Like these are aspects that can be brought into a D&D game, and talking to your players about, as the DM, or your players talking to the DM about like, this is the kind of stuff that like is going on in the world. How is that reflected in your game? How do we deal with these issues when they come up as a party? I'm thinking of an instance, right now, like our in our campaign right now, we kind of went through a recent arc where it was I was joking with our DM Tim, my husband, that it was his commentary on capitalism, and like how dangerous capitalism can be when it's pushed without a lot of thought behind it. And we're also going through an arc right now where there is someone seeking to wipe out an entire like race of people. So it's like, let's bring in, if this is, safe to do so, like, let's bring in the topics of racism. Let's bring in the topics of this, because we can't not talk about it anymore.
And especially, sorry, just real quick. I think when we're discussing topics political topics to discuss, a lot of the people who don't necessarily need to deal with these topics, this is a great opportunity to put yourself in other people's shoes without expecting them to then come around and explain things to you.
Yes.
Or paying people whose job it is to explain these things to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you are someone who has a large platform, if you are someone who is already paying people to be producers or to be sound engineers, you can also spend some money to hire a diversity or an accessibility consultant. There are amazing humans who do this as their job, that are very knowledgeable and very passionate. A lot of them also have a lot of lived experiences in at least some of these identities.
Yeah.
And they can help you walk through and notice the things that you might not have, right? Because intent and impact
is so different. Yeah.
It's like, again, like, we could talk about this for hours. Like, if anybody who watches Realms of Ugador Season 2, I am touching on racism, sexism, capitalism, and a few other isms as we spoke about. Like, Forgotten Realms specifically, sorry, Wizards, it's racist and sexist as shit. Like, everything about their lore is terrible. And it was made in the 80s, and it hasn't been changed. And they're now going back and tweaking things. But, DMs out there who are creating these worlds and creating these safe places for everyone, like, this is you're in charge. You can make whatever you want to make out of it. And I have a responsibility as a streamer to touch on these things as lightly or as hardly as I can to make that change. There are no humans, dwarves, elves, gnomes, or halflings in my campaign. They are all exotic races, and we're in a completely exotic world where orc is the common. And there is a group of people that are called the Hesian Empire that are trying to eradicate all exotic races. And they are pushing their religious agenda. And, like, there's all these different things that are happening in this thing, and I'm utilizing this platform, Twitch and D&D, to help bring things to attention while still being, entertaining and still being, informative and everything else. But we have so many amazing questions, too. And
I'm
running out of time.
We could literally just...
But something you guys we were talking about where... I've DM'd a lot of vets in the past, and we all vets, we all have the same stereotype, all the things, right? Like, my door being behind me is huge for me, even though I have a camera. And then, when I was several years ago, I used to have a mirror. If I couldn't have my back where I could see the door, I would have a mirror, so I would at least put my anxiety at ease. Because, XYZ, like, okay, I'm going to use my mug as a weapon and whatever. Like, this is what goes through our minds. Sorry, I have a weird throat thing going on today. But one of the vets that I used to DM, and I think we talked about this in y'all's panel, I can't remember, but he's a really, really big dude. He played football. He was also a vet. He's like 6'5", very muscular, didn't want to play D&D, but like his friends talked him into it, was super against doing all things D&D. All things roleplay and all that. By the end of the 3-hour session, he was literally standing up on his chair, screaming, "I'm a gnome wizard, and I'm going to use fireball." And everyone was like... And then they all cheered. And then we praised his... Like, again, literally the smallest thing compared to... Like, it was just wild watching that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Which leads into the next question, and then I'm gonna drink
It's such a transformative experience with D&D.
Yeah,
it can be so empowering.
It's so amazing. I love this game so much. What made you realize tabletop was what helped you get through a struggle?
Oh, I think I've got an answer for that one right off the top. The work that I do is, everyone's work is hard. Everyone's work is hard for a lot of reasons. Work just as a concept in the, the society that we have around kind of like grind culture and like needing to be on your hustle all the time and not having time for yourself. That can be very difficult. I work as a therapist. I work with young people. I also work with young people who are at moderate to high risk of suicide. That is my main primary role. I'm a suicide prevention therapist by trade. I work on a small but very passionate team about our jobs, and I work in conjunction with a couple different school districts. So my clientele is wonderful and amazing, and They're just some of the most passionate and profound young people I've ever met in my life. And a lot of my work is talking with these kids about how they want to die. That's what I do a lot of the time. And sometimes there'll be stuff that comes home with me. And especially now with the transition towards COVID, I'm working from home, which is very different for me as someone who's a therapist who is like, I was doing outreach. I was constantly on the go. I was driving to a whole bunch of different schools and different places and hanging out with all my kids and all of that kind of stuff. And now here I am kind of chained to my desk in my house, often even in my bedroom, talking about heavy stuff that I could usually just kind of leave outside. So I think for me, something that, really, really told me that, tabletop gaming was tabletop gaming, the second I started doing it, has been a big thing in my life. But when it was just like, I could show up to my weekly D&D session, which we were then streaming at the time, because we transitioned to streaming basically right away when COVID started, and say, hey, in the 5 minutes before stream, I have had a exceedingly rough week at work. I'm so happy to be here. If Neppy's a bit more emotional than usual, it's probably me coming in. And if she gets, if something activates me that, she wouldn't normally activate her, that's probably why. And to see that, the players that I sit with go around the table and be like, we're here and we got you. And we're on the internet and we're here and we got you. So knowing that I have a group of people and a DM who care about me in just this profound way, and even the concept of being a D&D streamer is always very strange to me. Something I still get used to. Still getting used to. So I think that was a moment for me that was just like, yep, you're going through a tough time with work. It's hard. You're transitioning to a new method of work, and you are so fucking excited to play D&D every week with your group. Yeah. So that's that for me, for sure.
That's awesome. Can I share a client story? Because I have, like, I obviously care about D&D in my personal life too, but this is one of the reasons that I keep doing this. I was working with a group of veterans, and I had a veteran who, when he came to the group, he told the group that the reason he was in the group was because his case manager hated him and made him come to the group. Great start. Never played D&D, no interest in games or anything. Participated in the first couple of sessions. Like after session 2, I realized that like he wasn't asking questions about his character sheet and like knew exactly what spell he wanted to use. So I was like, okay, you keep telling me you don't care, but like you've spent some time looking over your character sheet. All right. And he a couple sessions later he had to miss because he had another doctor's appointment. And he came back the week after, and the whole group was like, man, like we really missed you. We really needed you. Like we needed those spells that you have. And it was really hard without you. And that session went really well. There was a lot of combat and some fun puzzles. And at the end of the session, he kind of, this was a capital T therapy game. And so we have 90 minutes of play and 30 minutes of process. And during this process, he said, man, like I didn't want to come to this group. I didn't want to be in this group. I thought this was dumb. And he said, but honestly, like I'm a combat vet, and this is the closest I've felt to like my team since I was deployed. Like this is the closest I've felt. I've been able to, like, I feel like I matter again. And that hasn't happened since I got back. And that for me was just a really profound moment.
Yeah.
It's such a wild thing. It's like, especially vets specifically, like you go to boot camp, most of the people who go to boot camp, they don't have a family or like a family network or a healthy family. So they break you down, they build you up, and they teach you about having this group, this family. And when you leave, they don't do a fucking thing to support you when you leave. It's like, it's literally like when you watch the movies and you see the guy who's been in jail for 20 years and he walks out by his damn self and just walks towards wherever. That's exactly how it feels. I had a vet. I didn't even know this, which is why I was like, wow, thank you for telling me. I had a vet who again, this was just a for fun game. This wasn't like for any sort of anything, but it was just really just community. Who told me, because when I put them into this encounter, they were like flanked and there was enemies everywhere, and the team communicated amazingly. They worked really well, and they got out of there with no one getting hurt. And told me afterwards, he's like, "Thank you. You replaced a memory." I was like, "Replaced a memory?" He's like, "Yeah, when we were in Iraq, we were flanked, and it did not end well." And now I just think about this. I think about this D&D game and how a group worked well, and I was like, "What?" like that
So much of it the same. I haven't worked with vets, but working with young people who often have stronger connections with chosen family than they do with real family, who may not accept them as they are, may not provide a safe place or the adequate needs for things that they need to grow up and be a healthy, successful, functional human, will find connection with others in a tabletop setting.
Yeah.
Because they see these people, they show up every week, and they become the friendships that they make are just profound and deep, and they mean something. They mean so much because they know that person's going to be there for them. It's so cool. It's so cool.
Yeah.
We do have one more question, and this is a big one, so we're not going to answer this in 2 minutes, but I just want to get some thoughts in it because I'm very curious as well. How do you approach characters with mental illness or a mental health disorder as players and as a DM?
So I think it's going to depend on what that looks like and what the purpose of the game is, right? So I'm not going to be okay with someone saying like, oh, well, bipolar seems interesting, so I'd like to play a character who's bipolar, right? Like we're not going to use mental health as a costume. We're just not doing that. Yep. But if you have your own diagnosis, or you kind of just want to put some of your symptoms onto your character, or some previous symptoms onto a character, because that's going to help you kind of think about some stuff. Again, you want to be really careful about where that line is for, like, is this a game that's just for fun, where we just want to hang out and have fun? Then totally play with yourself. You don't have to not be depressed to be allowed to play with your friends. That's screwed up. But in terms of that intentionality around that work, really think about what is the purpose of this game, what is safe to do here, and what is kind of ethical to do here, right?
Yes.
I think, ethical, I think really hits the nail on the head. I mean, especially we're in the day and age where we're conscious of appropriation. We understand what it's like or what it means to wear somebody else's identity as a costume without any of the repercussions that go along with it.
Yes.
So yeah, if we're just looking to play a character with schizophrenia because we thought it was funny or interesting in that one horror movie where that everybody who has multiple personalities is like, this is a really bad movie, then that's something that we need to be conscious of.
I think there's and I really love the phrasing that Elizabeth brought in today, talking about intentionality. And there's, and something that I always like to kind of hallmark to is the concept of like reverence, that like these folks that you're portraying in your campaign are people and deserve the compassion and care that we give to everyone. There are absolutely ways to, portray neurodiversity in your games. There's ways to portray folks of color, even if you are a white person, doing so with aspects of respect and, care and not being appropriative of their culture, or not leaning into stereotypes that are negative and harmful. Avoiding tropes, avoiding things that are steeped in racism, or systemic issues and areas of oppression. I've been chatting with some folks from a local organization here that works with trans and gender diverse folks to provide services for them. And one of their best phrases for what is okay in their work is don't be an oppressive jerk. So don't be an oppressive jerk in your game.
There you go. That's the panel.
That's it. That's the whole panel. That's the whole tweet right there. But if you can find ways to bring honor and reverence and intention towards what you do, there is so many ways to represent humanity in your game. Whether that's folks with mental illness, whether that's folks who are, have many intersections of their life and lived experience, and even yourself as a character. Like allow yourself in your world to be multifaceted, because humanity is, and it's complex.
Yeah.
I think the easy answer to that question is play the character, don't play the identity.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So play what the character wants, what the character needs, and then everything else is just part of the character's given circumstances.
Yeah.
And part of that can be, right, you're pulling in personality traits and you're pulling in experiences, but you don't have to be like, this is my depressed character and this is my black character. Like, don't.
Yeah, you don't have to do that. I mean, and from the DM's perspective, don't check a fucking box, people. Like, don't check a box and don't exploit something for a punchline. Like, I had one player who was experiencing traumatic stuff, and the way that he thought he would do it, he would just be an alcoholic and a drug user, and would just comatose. And I was like, nah, we're not doing that. So he ended up getting like an ability that made him so he couldn't get drunk or high. Like, I took that away from him because of how he was exploiting it in the game, which didn't make me feel good. And I know it doesn't make other people feel good. Like, there's ways to do that, and there's ways to express that. But like you all have said, like, you don't just wear it. Like, if that's your character and if it makes sense, then go for it, right? Like, there are, especially in the beginning of the game where, I had like a handful of gay couples in my NPC world, right? Just a handful. But they didn't, my players never really navigated to where they were. And I was like, well, I'm realizing I don't have enough. So then, I have more. So now there's lots of inside jokes or whatever, because there's ancient silver dragon who is very bi and likes the young ones. And so there's all these inside jokes and everything else.
Is he single?
She's she's kind of single now, I guess.
Kind of single.
But it's
hey, they
maybe she's
are well
exploring her
off.
polyamorous life. Like, let her live her truth.
You've
That
been around
sounds
for
great.
thousands of years. Like, do what you like. You just get bored. You want to whatever. Anyway.
Monogamy sounds boring after 1,000 years. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, yeah.
But yeah, it's about just including it, though. It's all it's really just about including it, because it's like it feels right. Like, it's very obvious when it's forced. It's very, very obvious when it's forced, and it's just like, why is this? It just kind of feels like it's out of place in the world, right?
Yes.
And it's just by being present and being aware of what's going on.
I was watching a video last night. It was Matt Colville, I think, and he was talking about how fantasy is not just like not reality, but fantasy is also what you want to see.
Yep.
It's your dreams and hopes, and so
aspirations. Yeah. Can I I'm gonna just say something really quickly here. I think that that like diversifying and broadening your world to include like multiple intersections of humanity is something that I hope is done better over the course of the next iterations of canonical books that come out. There is one campaign setting that is just being released, however, that is one of the best supplementary D&D 5e compatible stuff that I've ever seen, that includes stuff around sociopolitical and cultural issues, racism, gender diverse folks, folks of different sexual orientations, and it is also an Afro fantasy universe. It's the Wagadu Chronicle, and if you have any wherewithal to go check them out on Kickstarter, their stuff is unbelievable. It is so beautiful, and it written into their lore book is that like this exists in the universe, like this just exists. That's not necessarily your choice to include it. It's like you should include this in your world, because this is how this is the diversity of people. So that's my big plug for Wagadu. I love them very much.
We've been plugging them every Wednesday actually during our
they're wonderful.
Show. Yeah,
they're awesome.
Yeah.
So we're over time, and I have to get ready for another show. But where can everybody find you, Em?
You can come find me over at Blackwater D&D. Actually, with respect to Wagado, we have I interviewed myself and our producer and one of our other castmates interviewed Alan from the Wagado Chronicle yesterday, and we have a recorded video coming up for Chatwater tonight. So if at some point come check out the VOD to hear all about Wagado, you can find me on Instagram at Blackwater D&D. You can also find us at twitch.tv/Blackwater D&D. Come hang out, come say hi, give us a follow, and come check out the show. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm so happy to have been here. This is great.
Very excited to have you here. Elizabeth.
So you can find me on Twitter at Doctors Kilmer. It's me and my husband, who's also a doctor. But the best way to find me or contact or get involved is to check out Game to Grow. So gametogrowth.org. We offer therapeutic groups for children and adolescents and adults. I offer individual therapy. We have other individual therapy services for Washington and Texas. And then we have trainings for community members, educators, and mental health professionals in using therapeutically applied RPGs. So please hit me up, get involved.
You're also in our Discord as well, if you want to chat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Discord. Find me in the Discord as well.
Awesome. And Austin.
You guys can find me on YouTube at Queer Venture Time. She's a cute little baby YouTube channel who is just 5 followers away from 100. So, and yeah, if I'm also on the Discord. If anybody wants me in their streaming shows, I would hit me up.
Awesome.
Yes.
I have an acting degree that I haven't used in 7 months now. So,
well,
I'm also in the Fabled Discord too. If anyone, please feel free to come say hi and drop me a line as well.
Well, Austin might be in something soon. Question mark.
Amazing.
But thank you all so much for watching. Stay in the chat. You are all welcome to stay in chat and answer any of the questions if you want. I'm going to stop this stream and then start the next one, the countdown for the other one. Go ahead and type Legends in the chat to enter our giveaway, and we will see you guys soon.
Take care, folks. Have a good night.
Bye.